Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We have a couple items on here today that we'll deal with Gina James. We have a couple miscellaneous items. I think we're going to cover some letters of support that have been requested of us. And I do have a short executive session deal on a contract. So we'll get started with today. Gina, I see you're there. You want to chime in and go?
Yes, thank you so much. I apologize. I'm not there in person. I have a sick kiddo today, so I'm juggling that. I wanted to go over a couple of things with you today. So on the agenda, I have developmental disabilities as an item. So we'll start with that. We have received an amendment to our developmental disabilities contract. This particular contract, as a reminder, is specific to supporting adult employment, day programs, and child development services for individuals in our community with a developmental disability. We've received an amendment to that contract for some changes due to some legislation that passed last year. So I mentioned on the adult side, this contract supports employment and day programs. The day program is called Community Access. Historically, with this contract, individuals can be in one or the other. So they can either be in the employment program or they can be in the day program. There was legislation that passed last year in 2022 that changed that. So effective this year, individuals can be in both programs at the same time. So they can be in both employment and in day programs at the same time. That has not historically been the case. It has usually been either or. And so we've received an amendment for this fiscal year in the amount of, where is it? Here it is. A little over $165,000. And that's only through the remainder of this current contract period, which ends June 30th. That funding is to just support that change with the clients. So, and we've seen it starting a little bit already. We have some clients that have chosen to be in both programs. And so those are being authorized already. So this funding, the state is amending our contract to add this funding just to support that additional service that has been authorized by the legislature. So that's what the amendment is. What we would do is bring that to a Tuesday meeting with the corresponding provider pass-through contracts for the boards to consider. Again, it's just that $165,000 for the remainder of this year. And then when the state issues our contract for the new fiscal year, this service funding would just be rolled into that existing contract.
And I always say this, and I know the answer, but I just like it on record. It's a reimbursement program. Yeah,
it's cost reimbursement. I don't anticipate utilizing all of it, and we haven't historically, but yes, it is cost reimbursement. Whatever is unspent just stays at the state.
Okay. Questions for Gina?
Gina, I did have a question. The amount that the state identifies as being available is based on their determination of how many people are in Cowlitz County that qualify for these services?
Correct. It takes into account a couple of things, the number of eligible clients, and it also factors in their acuity level, which is sort of individuals screen as either low, medium, or high acuity, depending on their needs and abilities.
And so for the most part, these are folks whose disabilities won't go away. So it's not like we're providing treatment that they will become less disabled, but this is kind of a permanent situation for them. their ability to get jobs is, depending on their intellectual rating, like you mentioned. But it's not something we can hope to work our way out of even having the program.
Correct. These are considered long-term supports for these individuals. Their developmental disabilities, it has to be determined before they are of the age of 18. So they have to do those medical screenings before the age of 18, and it has to be determined to be expected to continue indefinitely. So that's part of the criteria that's evaluated.
Thank you.
Gina, can you tell me who the providers are?
Yes, we currently work with 3 providers. So we work with LifeWorks serves the largest number of clients. Goodwill, Compass Career Solutions, and then we actually we just started working with a 4th provider, Employers Overload.
Okay, thank you. Just a second. You talk faster than I can write,
I'm sorry.
but you're right faster than I can talk, so I guess it's all right. What happens at the end of June?
Our current contract expires. The state typically sends a contract for the new fiscal year in May or June after the end of the legislative session when numbers are finalized.
So we will soon see something.
Yeah.
And what's the total amount of the contract that you might expect in June or in?
Let's see. This year's contract is about 1.7 million. So I anticipate the next one to be slightly higher than that, maybe 1.8.
Okay, and you mentioned children in your opening. This LifeWorks, Goodwill, Compass, and Employees Overload don't sound like something children would be doing.
Right. So those are our adult service providers. We do work with the Progress Center for the Child Development Services. There wasn't anything in this amendment that is affecting the child services. It's only the adult services.
Okay, so that would happen in the next contract then.
Correct.
And then a thing with children that always puzzled me, which is, how do we know? I don't want to condemn a child to the label of you're disabled in some way. And some of us are slow bloomers. Some of us are late bloomers. Some of us have speech problems that are interpreted as this guy's an imbecile. And so how do we protect against things like that?
So with the child development services, it's a big process, and there's lots of evaluations and assessments involved. I'm not 100% sure at what point there becomes a specific label. Probably if there can be a clear diagnosis of something at that point, and then that would probably begin. But yeah, I think that's a tough one because there are those diagnoses that have to happen. But
if family physicians or pediatricians suspect, is this situation where it's an automatic report to the state for further investigation?
If a physician is seeing some like that a child is not meeting kind of the standard developmental milestones, they might refer them over to the Progress Center for additional assessment, in which case it may or may not turn into a formal diagnosis. It might just be that there's some skill building that the Progress Center helps teach the parents or whatnot that they can do in the home to help build the skills to get that child back on track. So it doesn't always lead to an official diagnosis and long-term supports, but sometimes it does. And I don't think that they report to the state. I think they just do a referral to community resources.
And you mentioned Progress Center. Are there other similar agencies that do the kind of work that Progress Center does? I know
Um,
periodically you do a request for proposal to solicit interest.
I believe the Progress Center is our only neurodevelopment center in Cowlitz County. I think there is another agency that does provide some services to children. I'm not going to remember the name of the agency though. It'll hit me later.
So as part of the contract renewal, would you solicit, make available that this money is available for qualified applicants?
We can do that. I think I will look into that because, like I said, historically, the Progress Center has been our only neurodevelopment center, and that's part of the qualification to provide these services. But I'll look into that a little bit more just to be sure.
I think that makes sense, doesn't it, to see if there are other people out there that can.
Yeah, I was under the impression that this was going to be sort of like an omnibus contract, and then from that, we would give contracts to these various providers
As they would apply for them.
as a qualify.
Oh,
And then we say, of the 1,000,007, LifeWorks gets 500,000 not to exceed and cost reimbursement.
I got you.
Yeah.
So if
Yeah.
another vendor felt they were qualified, they could get into that.
I would hope so. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And
think
we
that's true, isn't it?
actually, with this particular contract, we're required to have a bid posting open year round. And so at any time throughout the year, a provider could submit a response to that, to the county to say, hey, I think I'm qualified to do this work. And we would go through that process of verifying their qualifications. With our existing providers, we have to qualify them annually. And so we do that each year, is verify that they're to the state standards of being a qualified provider for these services.
Which is what employers overload must have done this year to get added to the list, right?
Yes, they did this. They went through that process. They submitted an application and we verified that they're a qualified provider.
I do appreciate the openness. Asking about the children again. So there are some children who would be obviously mentally or have a learning disability or something like that. That's pretty serious, and you'd know that soon enough. In that case, do we see these people working their way up the system? Like, what happens? When does a 3-year-old become something other than a child?
Well, I can, for the child development services under this contract, one of their primary goals is to work with a child. They go birth to 3 years old for these particular services. And their primary goal is to help transition to whatever school setting will be next for that child. And that, depends on where the child lives and what their school district has to offer. And so I mentioned it may or may not, these services may or may not turn into some type of formal diagnosis, but their goal is to gather this information, help transfer that as the child moves on.
So
at
there
what
isn't
point
a
a child,
continuity. So there
Right.
isn't a continuity. There's a gap there where other things happen.
they try to transition that student into the next school setting. There is a gap because often, well, again, it depends on where the child lives. If they can transition to a preschool program, sometimes it's more seamless. But if they are transitioning to kindergarten, there is a gap in there of a couple years where there's no services provided under DDA services.
And so I don't know about other school districts, but I know Longview School District does have a preschool program at the old Broadway the Broadway school. So, and then again, they have specialized programs to help them get ready for a kindergarten. in special ed. So I mean, it's all getting ready for the next level up, but I don't know about other districts. That's
I mean,
not,
it seems like we're talking about a serious group of people that needs pretty long-term serious help. So it's sort of curious that there's this big hole in the middle. That, yeah. Okay. And then I appreciate that. Say there's a 50-year-old that has a what do you call that? A blood clot, ends up with a
stroke.
stroke. Thank you. See, it just happened. They would then be able to come into one of these programs.
So the definition that my understanding, and we don't do the eligibility, the state determines eligibility. But I know the definition that they operate off of in statute currently says that the disability has to originate before the individual is 18. And so there is that kind of time frame, that limit in there. The state has been making an effort to try to make sure that individuals are aware of developmental disability services that are available before they turn 18, because, you know, if someone has a developmental disability and they don't explore that until after they're 18, they miss that window. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you say the state determines eligibility, that means it's really not, it's in the hands of some state agency that's here, say in Longview.
Correct. The local DSHS office there, they have a developmental disabilities section there locally in that office, the Kelso office, and they have case managers that go through that process with individuals.
Okay, got it.
Okay.
Okay. So if you think of questions later on this, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm happy to answer any questions. I see a hand.
Yeah, the hand. I am curious, based on all these questions, on just as much data as possible as we can get. The ones I can think of offhand are just largely age bend in each of the providers. And if there's history there, that's always a good thing, because I would expect the numbers to continue to climb, because if you're developmentally disabled, and as Dennis said, they'll be there a long time.
I think we see a rise in cases.
Right,
Of,
so we
of
should see
different
this.
things, yeah.
We should see this 1.7 million go up as years go by. If for no other reason than they're more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we think on Tuesday, Gina?
It won't be ready for this next Tuesday, but we'll put those together and get it routed. So it should be the next couple weeks.
Okay, thank you. And then you wanted to touch on the CHG too?
I do. I actually have one more related to developmental disabilities.
Okay.
There was an additional piece of legislation that passed last year that requires the DSHS to establish what's called a school to work program in all counties across the state. So school to work program, or you might have heard the term transition services, is to try to connect students with a developmental disability who are approaching graduation, which for this population, they're typically in their high school until age 21. And so this school to work service is intended to help connect with those students who are approaching graduation and connect them with the adult employment program so that right when they graduate, they're ready to get into employment if they choose to do so. So what as a result of the legislation that passed last year, we have received a contract from DVR, which is the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. That's a section of DSHS. So they have, they're working with counties to try to get this program up and going across the state. They have sent us a contract. It's a program development contract. So it'll happen, they're hoping it will happen in 2 phases. The first phase is program development, and the second phase is direct services. So the program development phase, that's the contract we've received already, and that would come in front of the board. It's $240,000 for 2 years, so about $120,000 per year. That is to support our community in developing this school to work program. So it would pay for a county, it would pay for some staff time for our DD coordinator, our staff time for them to connect with the schools, connect with service providers to develop this school to work program. There's referral forms and things like that that have to be put into place. So that's the program development piece. And then at some point there would be a direct service contract that DVR would issue to counties as well. That would then provide funding for the providers to work with clients in the school to work program. So it sort of happens in 2 phases. At that point, the first phase kind of dwindles out. The program development piece is then done and the program is established. And then it would be a service contract with DVR for the providers it would be a pass through similar to our adult employment program to providers to provide the service to those clients. So at that point, ideally the students who are approaching graduation would already be working with an employment provider while they're finishing school, and start looking at their job skills and abilities and start kind of getting that foundation established. So when they turn 21 and they graduate high school, they can move right into the employment program from that point on. So I wanted to introduce that to the board and, let you think on it, answer any questions you might have. As I mentioned, the state is tasked with making sure this is available in each county. So it, whether it's through us or it comes like up through Clark County, the state will make sure that it's available in our county. So that's a new one we've been looking at and learning about for our community. We've been looking at some of the numbers that we have, the data that we have for students. It looks like we would have maybe between 10 to 15 students per year that were in the category of approaching graduation each year. So not a lot of students, but
what do they do now? What are we replacing?
I don't know that there's anything happening now. There's one program in town called STEPS that is like a transition services program, but I think it's really limited. It might only be for Longview School District. So it's pretty limited. So this funding is to try to make sure that each student is connected with and they have the information they need, hopefully, and will engage and transition into employment.
What?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Yeah. This really sounds interesting. Actually, some details, maybe it's too early, but if you don't have an answer, that's fine. What's the time for the program development? What's the time target?
So the contract is a 2-year contract. The start date on it is April 1st through March of 2024. Oh, I'm sorry, through March of 2025.
Okay, and the deliverable at that time?
To have, for the program development contract, the deliverable would be to have the program established. So the referral mechanism in place, the outreach to all the schools. So there's a point of contact for referrals and communication, and have all of those details worked out and established, any brochures or marketing materials, things like that.
Okay, so it'd be like the operating manual, the policy procedure manual for that program.
Right.
Okay, and what does this mean to an employer? So why would I get involved with the program as an employer?
So as an employer, we get this question a lot. There's no financial payment to an employer. I always like to mention that because we get that question a lot. For an employer, you have a diversified workforce. You have an individual that is, committed to their job. We see some pretty high job retention with our adult employment services. And so that's one of the benefits. We've heard from employers before too that, sorry, I keep getting notices pop up and it's really distracting.
Yeah, I think you answered enough of my question there. So there are really no strings attached. We would normally hope that an employee understands everything you just described and
Right.
says, I can do a good deed for him and me, or her and me, whoever it might be. So that sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, one of the anecdotal, but one of the pieces of feedback we've heard from a couple different employers is that having an individual in this program employed helps to enhance their staff morale in the workplace. So we've heard that from a couple of different employers that we work with.
Okay. I don't see any more questions on that, Gina.
Okay, so we'll, same as the last, that contract will get started through routing. So we'll get that scheduled in for a future Tuesday meeting. And my consolidated homeless grant follow-up. So we had a work session last week on the consolidated homeless grant application, and there were a couple of questions that I went back and talked with the state about. So one of the questions was about sub-granting with local municipalities. That's perfectly fine if we want to do that. I think then we work with our local. I think it could happen a couple of ways where we, encourage them to respond to an RFP, or we may be able to do like an interlocal agreement or something like that. So, but yes, that is allowable with these funds. There was also a question about whether the eviction prevention funds that are new in this contract can be used or can help support the mediation or dispute resolution center. And that answer was yes, that it could be used to support that effort. There is a data entry component. And so the project has to use the homeless management information system. So there's data entry that has to happen, but it's an easy system. There's lots of free training. So that's not a huge component.
Have you talked to the mediations center about this?
I have not, but as I was talking with the state about using the funds with this type of project, I would love to connect with them. We could even, if the board directs me to put the application together, we can work with them on the, and get their input on those pieces of the application. There are specific questions about the eviction prevention funds that we would have to describe how we plan to use them. And so coordinating with them on some of those pieces would be helpful in that sense.
Good. Yeah.
Do we need a motion to direct you to do that? If so, I'll make the motion. I think that's a good move to take for the Kellett Center.
Yeah, there is one thing I do want to be sure before going too far forward. I, as I've mentioned last time, it really just rent subsidy as is currently envisioned and used is counterproductive, but mediation, I think, is a good thing. So if we have mediation, do we have to have the other one? And if we have the other one, can we write some more rules, more or less, like paying somebody's back rent for a whole year? Just didn't sit well with me. It just seemed abusive.
Yeah.
I think you understand we have some interest in mediation center, right? I don't want to run a motion because I'd like the public to have the opportunity to talk on that before we step into that, but I think she understands it. Yeah, we have an interest.
Agreed.
There.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I will mention too that I think the state would allow us to use most of that funding for operations, which is like the staff time. The grant includes some other funding that can be used for rent assistance if as I was thinking about it and the grant, if rent assistance is helpful in that mediation process, if there's short-term rent assistance that, they identify as a need in that mediation process with the Dispute Resolution Center, we may be able to use some of the other grant funds to help support that, in which case it's short-term, time limited. They have to produce a lease and all of those pieces that are more strict than what we previously saw with our other programs. So we can look into some of those options too.
Yeah, I like that a lot, actually.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Appreciate the answers on that. Thank you for that.
yeah, thank you. Do I have permission to move forward with the application?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay.
I see 3 nodding heads, so you're good.
Okay. Okay. We will do that. I think I mentioned this last time, to submit the application, we have to have the chair of the board sign a certification. And so we would work with Commissioner Dahl on that or could bring it back to a commissioner conference, that type of thing. So.
Yeah, just the only thing I ever request on those is I would like my colleagues to also see that copy.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, actually.
Okay, thank you, Gina. Miscellaneous, do you want to tackle these? We've had 3 letters. We've had 3 requests for letters of support. So
If I
Yeah.
may, I asked, and it looks like Doug Jensen is on in case we have issues. So I would ask that we start with.
Yeah. Can we tackle the one that may have issues first?
I'm sorry?
The quarry?
Yeah.
Yeah,
The
I think
quarry.
that's what you're asking for.
Yeah, that's what I have in mind.
Perfect.
It's actually not a quarry question directly.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the crux of the problem.
Right.
So briefly, what we have from the City of Woodland and the mayor has asked the county to draft a letter to Clark County concerning the Cardia Hill Service mining overlay. They're opposing it and they're asking the county to back them up. And I know Commissioner Mortensen sent some questions to Doug and I think those are valid things to go over before we even consider doing this. So Doug, do you mind if I turn that over to you and kind of touch on some of those?
I think the main issue is the impact of the letter from the county. It's really up to to Callus whether it wants to wade into the matter basically in support of Woodland. Legally and factually, it really, pardon me, has no impact on what Clark County is going to decide or how any type of reviewing body would view it. This is at this point an overlay, a zoning overlay expansion. It's not a site specific project. So you're looking at a project from 100,000 feet at an area of Clark County, not boots on the ground. So, I mean, really, it's much less a factual matter as it is really policy. It's a policy decision for this board.
But if I might add, it's an issue driven by the assumption that this is going to be a gravel pit or whatever you want to call it. And I always strive to keep the compartments apart. So I don't mind sending a letter to Clark County about something, saying, would you consider it this other way? But in this case, I don't know what other things that SMO might apply. Maybe it's some other kind of mine, and maybe it wouldn't impact Cowlitz County. It's really hard to knock on your neighbor's door and say, I hear you're potentially going to do something, don't do it. It's okay. It's not evil. It just doesn't seem productive to me.
Yeah. And looking through, the documents you sent over, it appears to me they don't really have a choice. They're because they're in the GMA, they're by statute told that they have to find these type of places.
Correct. There's an obligation on their part to designate and then delineate areas that have mineral resources. And there is a preservation and presumptively a utilization goal that goes along with that, with some caveats.
Hey, I'm a little confused there, Doug. So suppose all of Woodland were in Clark County. Here's what I'm really trying to ask. If there were development there already well established as city streets and all that, GMA doesn't say, well, we found that there is potential gravel pit there, so we have to do a surface mine overlay on you.
No, and in the staff report from Clark County Planning that I sent you, pretty much addresses that. There's a checklist of considerations in making those types of decisions that come into play. But again, you're talking about at this juncture just simply an overlay on lands that are not within the city limits and not currently urban developed. There may be impacts, but again, it's so far as Cowlitz County goes, as opposed to the city itself, perhaps a different perspective. But again, it comes down to if the board desires to send a letter to Clark County saying, proceed with extreme caution, that's up to the board.
It may be that we acknowledge the letter and send a letter on maybe something like well, I thought I could construct it off on the fly, but I'm not able to.
It's your district, so I'm going to kind of defer what you want to do with them.
Yeah, I know the City of Woodland thinks we abandoned them because the mayor has asked us before on things that we just really cannot do legally. And in this case, we could legally do something, but I don't want to get, the real problem will be for us, the City of Woodland will be exit 21 and the traffic coming through. So.
And that bridge too.
And the bridge, yeah. So I I wouldn't mind sending a little header beforehand, just saying, city, or I mean, Clark County Council, please consider that if this ends up being a mine at some point, there are issues that impact your neighbor.
Would you have any objection to drafting that?
No,
Would,
I might need some help.
yeah, Commissioner Weber, you'd be okay with that?
Sure.
I would.
I think, actually, I think it's timely to do that. We're currently involved with Woodland on other matters, and I think a gesture of good faith on our part is just makes sense. They are always concerned about whether or not we pay any attention to them, and
Yeah.
we certainly do. And
You're thinking, Mr. Jensen?
Well, we're sort of at a crossroads, you know, one of the points we noted earlier when our disagreement started was that City of Woodland had chosen to plan under and actually reference it in the comprehensive plan that they were planning in reliance on Clark County and growth management, and participated in their countywide planning policies process in 2019. On the other hand, you know, there's been a shift, and we're trying to work with Woodland now as a municipality of Cowlitz County. So, you know, maybe this is a gesture, you know, from where we split off from prior actions
All right. So,
on both parties.
So I'll draw something up and circulate it to you and my colleagues, and
Sure.
let's see where that goes.
Perfect.
And I think it makes perfect
Thank
sense
you.
to refer to the highlighted excerpts that you gave us on their own staff report about the proximity of population areas to the availability of public roads and other public services. I mean,
That's where
fits right
maybe
there.
you're going to have to edit the letter then. I'm far more succinct.
All right.
All right.
Okay, thank you, Doug. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
Very helpful.
Thank you.
The next one I just grabbed off my list is the Port of Kalama. Port of Kalama is asking us to draft a letter of support, and I think everybody has a copy of that.
It's a letter to our favorite Secretary of Transportation.
I'm sorry, I think I was trying to hear and I finally heard Kalama.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Port of Kalama is asking us to, and they've given us a sample letter, so if you've had time to look that through and we're good with that, if we want to do it, I don't know we need to change much on that.
Yeah,
letter.
the Port of Kalama is a star, I think. So I typically, unless there's something egregious in there, I would abide or comply.
The only thing I would add to this Kelly, let's put it like this other one with all three signatures, okay? The last one I see here is, we're asked to, it looks like Representative Orcutt and Senator Braun are trying to get some money for the Mount St. Helens Institute. And we're being asked to draft a letter as we see here to support them in this. Is that the way I'm reading it?
We're not making any commitment of dollars with this letter.
I don't see any commitment. I was looking through it and I didn't see any. We're just, the way I'm kind of understanding this, we're supporting Representative Orcutt and Senator Braun in their efforts.
I haven't been contacted by Ed, and Senator Braun would be unlikely to contact me. This actually is in the budget, the request that they've made. Can
I'd have
anybody
to verify
that?
with them. I don't. We can make a call and ask. I can make a call and ask.
Yeah.
Generally, at this point, a letter like this is to try to get it put in. rather than it's already in.
If it-
But it says, the request of 4 million submitted by and I just want to be sure that in fact that didn't get pulled out the last minute or something like that, so we look
Yeah.
ridiculous.
I can verify that.
Okay. And then, is there any way to interpret this as this is such a long-term thing. I don't want to commit county dollars today to it.
Yeah. I would have that concern too. I don't either. Yeah. I looked closely in here. I didn't. Sometimes it's hard to tell how people interpret things, but I don't see an interpretation that would put us in that bind.
Neither do I.
Yeah, there are a lot in the bullets, there are implied promises, and that's,
If we took the bullets out, does it still do the correct? They still give the,
I haven't looked at it hard enough to answer that, but
yeah.
I don't think the bullets make reference to any commitment of funding from us.
yeah, it may be that I'm a little bit out to lunch here in the sense that we get claims always about creating permanent jobs. And so it's just like the warning on the pack of cigarettes. It's like people just end up ignoring it. And I like for us to, their words mean something.
Yeah.
And we are really not doing this, at least I wouldn't do this because we want to generate tax revenue. We're doing it because it's a youth and education thing.
So drop the last two bullets.
I would drop the last two bullets.
Okay.
Why don't we do that?
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, then I will probably verify with Senator Orcutt that this is still, or Representative Orcutt, sorry. Sorry, Ed, this is still in the budget and hadn't been pulled. Once I verify that, then we'll run this up without those two and 3 signatures again. Okay.
Oh, Dennis, I always admire your skill. I do not know what the transformative power of the volcano is, but I think you mean it blew the hell out of everything and it was amazing.
Works for me.
I was in Vancouver watching it blow the hell out of. Any other miscellaneous? You have fairly short executive session, I think 10 minutes max. We can do that. Probably be less than that.
I think you have to announce the topic.
Contract
Or the-
negotiations.
Contract negotiations, that's good enough, yeah.
Good.
The commissioners have ended their 10-minute executive session regarding contract negotiations, and they have begun an additional executive session regarding review of a public employee for 10 minutes, ending at 2:40 p.m.
Okay, we've returned from an executive session. I guess no decisions were made. Do we have any other miscellaneous before we adjourn this? I don't see any hands. You answered the chat. Okay, good. Okay, seeing no hands, no questions, we will adjourn for the day. Thank you.